She thought she was merely fulfilling her duty, ensuring top-tier service standards. But within just 2 minutes, everything took a turn she never could have anticipated. A minor mistake, a rushed judgment, and now, she was facing the fury of the most powerful man she had ever encountered. What happens next? Stay tuned, because what unfolds will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for following our story. If you enjoy deep, unexpected narratives like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss out on what's coming next. And now, the story begins. Jonathan Carter stepped into the first-class cabin of the aircraft, his calloused hands gripping a well-worn leather briefcase. At 60, his graying hair and kind eyes reflected a lifetime of experience. Though a billionaire, Jonathan's appearance was strikingly modest. Dressed in a light gray suit, he looked more like a friendly neighbor than a powerful businessman. As he made his way down the aisle, he gave a slight nod to the other passengers, his gentle smile putting them at ease. Most of them completely unaware that they were sitting near one of the wealthiest men in the country. But that was how he preferred it. Jonathan had never enjoyed ostentation or drawing attention to himself. Finding his seat, he carefully placed his briefcase in the overhead compartment before settling into the plush leather chair with a quiet sigh of relief. The day had been long, filled with high-stakes meetings and weighty decisions. Now all he wanted was a peaceful flight home. A flight attendant approached, offering a practiced yet warm smile. "Would you like anything to drink, sir? Just a glass of water, please." "Thank you," Jonathan replied gently. As the flight attendant walked away, he turned to gaze out the window, watching the bustling activity of the airport outside. His mind drifted to the road he had traveled. Born into poverty, he had never even dreamed of flying first class, let alone owning his own company. His life had been filled with challenges, failures, and hardships, but those very struggles had forged the man he had become. Closing his eyes for a brief moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for everything he had achieved. But beyond wealth and fame, what he took the greatest pride in was his philanthropic work. Helping others brought him a joy that no luxury could ever replace. Around him, the first-class cabin grew livelier, the hum of conversation rising. Jonathan reached into his bag and pulled out a book, eager to lose himself in its pages for the next few hours. But what he didn't know was that this flight would be anything but peaceful. As the last few passengers boarded, Jonathan had no way of knowing that his life was about to take an unexpected turn. The calm before the storm was about to end, bringing with it a test of character that would forever change his perspective on the world. Settling into his first-class seat, Jonathan let out a slow breath, allowing the tensions of the day to fade away. He held onto the hope of a quiet, uneventful flight. But that moment of tranquility would not last long. Lauren, a flight attendant in her early 30s, approached with precise, polished movements. Her hair was perfectly styled, her uniform crisp, exuding an air of professionalism. Yet, in her eyes, there was a cold detachment as she gave Jonathan a once-over, her lips pressed into a firm, thin line. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice was sharp. "I believe you're in the wrong cabin. Economy class is in the back." Jonathan looked up, momentarily caught off guard by her tone. He offered a polite smile. "No, miss, this is my seat. Here's my ticket." He spoke evenly, having just returned from the restroom, ready for the flight to take off. Lauren raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. She darted a glance at the nearby passengers, many of whom had paused their own conversations to watch the interaction with interest. "I'll need to check your ticket," she said coolly, extending a hand expectantly. A familiar sting tightened in Jonathan's chest. He had faced this kind of treatment before, too many times to count. But that didn't make it any easier. Still, he remained composed. With steady hands, he reached into his pocket and retrieved the boarding pass, handing it over without a word, his expression calm yet dignified. Lauren snatched the ticket and held it up to the light, turning it this way and that as though searching for signs of forgery. The air around them grew tense. Conversations hushed. "Is there a problem?" Jonathan's voice was measured, unwavering, even as he endured this quiet humiliation in front of an audience. Lauren's eyes flickered between the ticket and his face before settling back on the slip of paper in her hands. She seemed unable to reconcile the unassuming man before her with the idea that he belonged in first class. "This ticket looks unusual," she said, her tone laced with suspicion. "I'll need to verify it with the gate agents." Jonathan drew in a slow breath, forcing himself to stay patient. He could feel the weight of the other passengers' stares, some curious, some sympathetic. But he would not let Lauren's assumptions shake him. "Go ahead," he said smoothly. "I'm sure everything is in order." Lauren pursed her lips and spun on her heel, disappearing with the ticket in hand. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. He thought of the long road he had traveled, the obstacles he had overcome. This was just another test, another chance to meet prejudice with grace. When he opened his eyes again, he glanced around at the passengers and offered a small, reassuring smile. Not just to them, but to himself. Jonathan's composure and dignity in this moment meant more than any angry protest ever could. Lauren returned, her face flushed with a mix of anger and humiliation. She shoved the ticket back toward Jonathan, her hand trembling slightly. "It appears the ticket is valid," she admitted through gritted teeth, her voice tight with frustration. "But there must be some mistake. Surely you meant to book a seat in economy?" Jonathan drew in a slow, measured breath. His patience was wearing thin. Locking eyes with Lauren, he spoke with quiet but unwavering authority. "There is no mistake, miss. This is my seat, and I have every right to be here." Lauren's face turned an even deeper shade of red, her composure unraveling. She glanced around the cabin. By now, the passengers were fully engrossed in the unfolding confrontation. "Sir, I need you to lower your voice," Lauren snapped, her tone sharp and accusatory. "You're being disrespectful, to me and to the other first-class passengers." Jonathan blinked, stunned. Had he raised his voice? Before he could respond, Lauren's hand suddenly shot up. Slap! The sharp crack echoed through the cabin. Jonathan's head jerked to the side from the unexpected blow. Silence. A collective gasp rippled through the first-class section. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Slowly, Jonathan turned back, lifting a hand to touch the burning sting on his cheek. His eyes widened, shocked, pained. Lauren stood frozen, her hand still suspended in midair, as if she herself couldn't believe what she had just done. Her face drained of color as the weight of her actions sank in. The cabin remained deathly quiet. Passengers stared, mouths agape, some discreetly pulling out their phones, others whispering in hushed, frantic tones. Jonathan remained still. For the first time since boarding, the dignified calm he carried wavered ever so slightly. He looked at Lauren, watching as panic flickered in her eyes, realization dawning of the gravity of her mistake. Taking a deep breath, he steadied his voice, keeping it low but firm. "Why did you slap me?" His words were barely above a whisper, yet they carried an undeniable weight, impossible to ignore. Lauren's face flushed again, but this time with embarrassment. She struggled to regain her composure, though her voice carried a slight tremor. "You disrespected me," she said, her gaze darting away. "This is first class, and we have certain standards to uphold." Jonathan slowly shook his head, unable to believe what he was hearing. He was about to respond when a quiet chime sounded from the phone in his jacket pocket. Glancing down, he saw the message and raised an eyebrow. While Lauren remained visibly agitated, Jonathan silently read the notification. It confirmed that his company had just finalized the acquisition of the parent corporation that owned this airline, a deal he had spent months securing. A faint smile ghosted across his lips. As the aircraft began taxiing for takeoff, Jonathan retrieved his phone once more and swiftly typed out a message to the airline's CEO. A direct request. His fingers moved efficiently across the screen as he composed an internal report detailing Lauren's conduct. Succinct, factual, and precise. Once the message was sent, Jonathan leaned back into his seat. For now, he chose to keep the recent acquisition to himself. There was no need to make a scene or draw unnecessary attention. Instead, he would act quietly, observe, gather information. Throughout the flight, Jonathan discreetly watched Lauren. He noticed how she avoided his section whenever possible, delegating tasks to other attendants at every opportunity. When forced to pass by his seat, her posture stiffened, her movements tense, her eyes darting away nervously. Jonathan also paid close attention to how she interacted with the other passengers. She maintained a professional but distant demeanor with most, displayed particular warmth toward a select few, and was noticeably less courteous to passengers of color. Each subtle detail registered in his mind, forming a clearer picture of the woman who had judged him solely by his appearance. Yet, rather than anger, Jonathan found himself contemplating the changes he could implement. As unpleasant as the incident had been, it had given him a rare and invaluable opportunity to witness firsthand the issues within the airline, and he was determined to use this experience to drive meaningful change, not just for himself, but for every passenger who might face the same kind of bias. As the flight continued, Jonathan kept his quiet watch over Lauren. And then, another moment made Jonathan's heart sink. An elderly black woman, her silver hair neatly pinned up, was struggling to lift her carry-on bag into the overhead compartment. She looked around, her eyes searching for help. "Excuse me." Her voice was frail, unsteady. "Could someone give me a hand?" Lauren stood nearby, arranging items on the service cart. She glanced up, her eyes briefly meeting the elderly woman's hopeful gaze. Then, she turned away, pretending not to hear. Jonathan frowned. At that exact moment, a white passenger seated a few rows ahead raised a hand. "Miss, could I get an extra pillow?" Lauren's entire demeanor shifted. A bright smile spread across her face. "Of course, sir. I'll bring it right away." Her voice was warm, her eagerness unmistakable as she hurried to assist the man. Jonathan clenched his jaw, his eyes locked on the scene before him. The difference in treatment was undeniable. Undeniable. A deep sadness welled in his chest, not just for the elderly woman still struggling with her bag, but for the larger, insidious issue unfolding before his eyes. He could not sit back and watch any longer. Jonathan rose from his seat and stepped toward the woman. "Let me help you with that," he said gently. Gratitude flickered in her eyes as she nodded. "Oh, bless you, young man. These old bones aren't what they used to be." Jonathan carefully lifted her bag and secured it in the compartment. As he did, he caught a glimpse of Lauren from the corner of his eye. She was watching. A strange mix of emotions flickered across her face. Confusion, defiance, and perhaps the slightest hint of shame. Returning to his seat, Jonathan's mind remained restless. This wasn't just about Lauren anymore. There was a deeper issue at play, one embedded in the culture of the airline itself. He pulled out his tablet and began jotting down ideas. Diversity and inclusion training, overhauling hiring practices, establishing clear policies to ensure equal treatment of all passengers, regardless of appearance or background. The list grew, evolving into a comprehensive plan, one that could transform the airline from within. But as the flight continued, Jonathan's unease did not fade. He reached for his phone, determined to dig deeper into the airline's history. Jonathan's fingers moved swiftly across the screen, searching for past complaints. What he found made his stomach tighten. Page after page, reports of discrimination by airline staff surfaced before his eyes. His brows furrowed as he scrolled through the seemingly endless list. Most of these complaints had been dismissed or addressed with nothing more than a perfunctory response. "This can't be real," he murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. Then, as he continued reading, a familiar name caught his eye: Lauren. There were multiple complaints mentioning her directly. Jonathan clenched his jaw as he read on. Passengers of color being ignored or treated coldly. Elderly travelers left without assistance. Even instances of open hostility toward passengers who didn't fit her narrow definition of a first-class traveler. One complaint in particular stopped him cold. A young mother traveling with her biracial child had been subjected to Lauren's cruel words and demeaning attitude. The lines on the screen felt like a direct indictment. "I felt humiliated and furious. My child asked me, Why doesn't she like us? How do you explain that to a 5-year-old? Jonathan's eyes burned. Memories surged forward, his own childhood, the countless times he had endured that same look, that same attitude. He had hoped things would be different by now. But clearly there was still so much work to be done. The deeper he read, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about one flight attendant. The sheer number of complaints, coupled with the airline's weak responses, pointed to something far worse. A system that was rotting from the inside. This wasn't just about Lauren. The problem had embedded itself into the airline's very culture, growing unchecked over time. With each passing minute, Jonathan's resolve hardened. Disciplining Lauren alone wouldn't fix this. The entire system needed a full-scale overhaul, from policies to training to corporate culture. Jonathan unlocked his phone once more, his fingers flying over the screen, compiling his thoughts. Mandatory cultural sensitivity and empathy training for all employees, overhauling the complaint resolution process to ensure every report is taken seriously, implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, with clear consequences, and this was just the beginning. Looking up from his screen, Jonathan's eyes settled on Lauren as she moved through the aisle, pouring drinks for the passengers up front. At that moment, he no longer saw just a single individual who had wronged him. He saw a symptom of something far bigger. His heart felt heavy, but the fire of determination inside him burned brighter than ever. Leaning back in his seat, Jonathan mapped out a plan, step by step. He understood that changing this airline wouldn't happen with quick fixes. It had to be systemic. Taking a deep breath, he began drafting a multi-layered reform strategy. First, a comprehensive training program on cultural sensitivity and empathy would be implemented across the entire company. Jonathan firmly believed that education was the key to shifting mindsets. He envisioned a curriculum that would broaden perspectives, fostering genuine understanding from the CEO down to the baggage handlers. We have to start at the root, he murmured to himself, continuing to type notes into his phone. The first group of employees to undergo this transformation, flight attendants like Lauren. They were the face of the airline, the ones who shaped a passenger's experience from the moment they stepped on board. Slowly but surely, Jonathan's plan began taking shape. He would implement these changes quietly, without fanfare or grand announcements. This wasn't about scoring points or making headlines. It was about real, lasting change. His gaze drifted back to Lauren. A mix of emotions churned inside him. Anger at her actions, sadness for the harm she had caused, but also a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, with the right guidance and education, even Lauren could change. Jonathan knew that simply punishing her wouldn't fix the deeper issue. It might satisfy a sense of immediate justice, but it wouldn't heal a system that had been broken for far too long. No, he needed to do more. He imagined interactive workshops where employees could share their experiences and learn from one another. Team-building sessions designed to break down barriers and foster genuine empathy. This was how true transformation would begin. And a future where every employee, from pilots to ticket agents, understood that every passenger deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. As the flight continued, Jonathan felt a greater purpose taking shape. A newfound sense of determination grew within him. This wasn't just a business decision. This was an opportunity to create real change, to impact lives in a meaningful way. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready. When the plane landed, Jonathan remained seated, allowing the other passengers to disembark first. He watched as Lauren bustled about, assisting some passengers with their luggage. Her attitude was inconsistently polite, warm and enthusiastic with some, indifferent and dismissive with others. Jonathan let out a quiet sigh. Slowly, he gathered his belongings and made his way off the aircraft. He nodded politely at the crew, including Lauren, who barely acknowledged him with a fleeting glance. As he walked across the jet bridge into the terminal, he pulled out his phone and typed a short message to his team. Begin the process. Absolute discretion. In the days that followed, news of Jonathan's acquisition of the airline remained under wraps. Behind closed doors, an internal investigation into Lauren's conduct began. The HR department discreetly interviewed passengers and crew members who had witnessed the incident. Meanwhile, Jonathan's team worked tirelessly, combing through employee handbooks, diversity training materials, and customer service protocols, determined to craft a sweeping reform strategy. Lauren had no idea that a storm was quietly brewing. She went about her days as usual, wearing her uniform with pride, greeting colleagues with a confident smile. In her mind, she had done nothing wrong. She believed she was simply upholding the standards of first-class service. During a break, she casually discussed the incident with a colleague. "Can you believe that guy?" She scoffed, lifting her chin with disdain. "He tried to make me look like the bad guy just for doing my job. Some people just don't understand how first class works." Her co-worker remained silent, a flicker of unease crossing their face. Everyone had heard whispers about an ongoing investigation, but no one dared to say a word. Reports from the investigative team continued to pour in. Jonathan read each one carefully, scrutinizing the details and making meticulous notes. His vision for a fair, inclusive airline, one that treated every passenger with dignity, was beginning to take shape. During a strategy meeting with his team, he made his stance clear. "We're not just changing policies on paper. We're reshaping the entire culture of this airline. The goal is to create an environment where every employee and every passenger is respected and valued." That morning started like any other. For Lauren, she arrived at the airport in her neatly pressed uniform, her hair styled into a perfect bun. But as she passed through the employee entrance, she noticed a few colleagues whispering, their eyes flickering toward her. She shrugged it off, assuming they were gossiping about something trivial. Then, at her locker, she found an envelope waiting inside. Lauren frowned, pulling it out and tearing it open. Her eyes widened as she read the contents. Mandatory cultural awareness training. She muttered the words under her breath, her voice tinged with disbelief. This has to be a joke. Her fingers tightened around the letter, her knuckles whitening with frustration. For over 10 years, she had been a flight attendant. She knew her job. She did it well. The idea that she needed a lesson on empathy felt like a slap in the face. Throughout her shift, the notification nagged at her. While pouring drinks, distributing pillows, assisting passengers, she couldn't shake the simmering resentment. Her entire career, she had prided herself on upholding the highest standards of first-class service. Who were they to tell her she needed to change? During her break, she vented to her closest friend and fellow flight attendant, Emily. "Can you believe this?" She waved the crumpled letter in frustration. "They're forcing me into this ridiculous training, as if I don't know how to treat passengers." Emily shifted in her seat, looking uneasy. "Well, maybe it's not such a bad idea, Lauren. Sometimes we all need a fresh perspective." Lauren's eyes narrowed in disbelief. "Are you saying I'm insensitive?" "No, that's not what I meant." Emily quickly backtracked. "I just think times are changing. Maybe the airline just wants to make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to service." But Lauren didn't want to hear another word. She shot up from her seat, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I don't need to be on the same page as anyone." Her voice was sharp, her frustration boiling over. "I know exactly what I'm doing, and I do it damn well. This is a complete waste of time." Without another glance at Emily, she strode out of the break room, her mind spinning with resentment. She would attend the training, of course, but she would make sure they all knew Lauren Williams was the model flight attendant. She didn't need anyone teaching her how to treat passengers. What Lauren didn't know was that the real test still lay ahead. The morning sun glinted off the glass towers of the city. Jonathan Carter sat in his new office at airline headquarters, overlooking a skyline that stretched endlessly into the horizon. Before him, his computer screen was flooded with passenger complaint reports. He scrolled through page after page, his expression growing graver with each entry. "This is worse than I thought," he muttered, shaking his head. Over the past few days, he hadn't just reviewed Lauren's records. He had studied reports on other flight attendants and airline staff, and a clear pattern had emerged. Years of racial bias, age discrimination, and preferential treatment, all meticulously documented by frustrated passengers. Yet most of these complaints had been dismissed or brushed aside. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, carefully mapping out solutions in his mind. He knew that mandatory training was just the first step. For real change to happen, he needed to build a system where every voice would be heard. His eyes burned with determination. Grabbing his phone, he dialed Sarah, the chief operating officer. "Sarah, I need you to set up a meeting with the tech team." His tone was firm. "We're launching an anonymous passenger feedback system." Over the next several hours, Jonathan and his team worked tirelessly, designing a user-friendly app that would give passengers a safe, direct way to rate their experience and leave detailed feedback, without fear of retaliation. The data collected would be analyzed in real time, allowing Jonathan to identify issues quickly and take swift action. As the day drew to a close, Jonathan's focus narrowed on the complaints concerning Lauren. He meticulously examined each report, taking careful notes on the patterns of her behavior. It was clear this wasn't an isolated incident. Her actions stemmed from a deeply ingrained mindset, one that had gone unchecked for too long. During a late meeting with the head of human resources, Jonathan set his pen down on the table, his voice thoughtful yet firm. "We can't just punish her." He spoke slowly, deliberately. "We need to give her the opportunity to understand and change." Together, they crafted a personalized improvement plan for Lauren. It wouldn't just include cultural awareness training, it would go further. One-on-one mentorship sessions, community outreach programs, opportunities to engage with diverse groups firsthand, experiences that might help shift her perspective and reshape her understanding of the world. As the sun dipped behind the towering skyline, shadows stretched across Jonathan's office. He sat quietly, reflecting on the day's work. The anonymous feedback system was in motion. The expanded training programs were rolling out. The individualized development plans, like Lauren's, were set in place. He knew that changing a company's culture wouldn't happen overnight. But as he gazed at the horizon, a quiet conviction settled in his chest. With patience, determination, and compassion, he truly believed he could transform this airline into a model of inclusion and respect. Monday morning, Lauren arrived at the airline's training center. Her lips pressed into a thin, tight line. She checked her watch, exhaling sharply before pushing through the glass doors. Inside, the room buzzed with energy. Other flight attendants had already gathered, waiting for the mandatory cultural awareness session to begin. Through gritted teeth, she muttered, "What a waste of time." She signed her name on the attendance sheet at the front desk, her pen strokes sharp and aggressive. The training room was arranged in round tables, each seating 6. Lauren chose a corner seat, crossing her arms as she sat down. She didn't acknowledge the other attendants joining her table. Her eyes remained fixed on the clock on the wall, counting the minutes. When Sarah, the training facilitator, stepped to the front, her voice was warm and energetic. "Today, we're going to explore real-world scenarios in cultural awareness." Lauren leaned back in her chair, disinterest written all over her face. Sarah continued with her unwavering enthusiasm. "Today, we'll discuss how to navigate cultural differences with understanding and respect." Her excitement filled the room, but Lauren merely rolled her eyes, visibly uninterested. When Sarah invited participants to share personal experiences with cultural misunderstandings, Lauren remained silent. She doodled absent-mindedly in her notebook, occasionally sneaking glances at her phone under the table. Sarah observed her closely before speaking gently. "Lauren, would you like to share your thoughts?" Lauren looked up, caught off guard. "I have nothing to say." Her tone was indifferent. "I do my job just fine." Sarah nodded, her smile unfaltering. "But there's always room to learn and grow, wouldn't you agree?" Lauren shrugged and returned to scribbling in her notebook. She didn't notice the concerned glance Sarah exchanged with her assistant, the same assistant who was discreetly adjusting a camera in the corner of the room. When the training moved into role-playing exercises, most participants engaged enthusiastically. Lauren participated begrudgingly. Her responses were blunt, her tone dismissive. When asked to demonstrate how she would assist a non-English-speaking passenger, Lauren sighed dramatically. "I just speak louder and slower." Her impatience was evident. "That usually works." Sarah gently suggested alternative approaches, but Lauren waved her off. "Look, we can't cater to every single person." Her voice was firm. "Sometimes they need to adapt to the way we do things." A heavy silence settled over the room. The air grew tense. But Lauren, oblivious to the impact of her words, simply checked the clock, eager for this politically correct lecture to end. As the session wrapped up, Sarah invited each participant to share one key takeaway. When it was Lauren's turn, she shrugged. "I guess we all have to walk on eggshells now." Her tone was laced with sarcasm. "Wouldn't want to offend someone just for doing our jobs." For a split second, Sarah's smile faltered, but she quickly regained her professional composure. "Thank you for your honesty, Lauren." Her voice remained calm. "I hope that as you reflect on today's session, you'll find more value in it than you realize now." Lauren grabbed her belongings and hurried out of the room. She never noticed Sarah's assistant carefully packing up the recording equipment. The camera had captured every moment of Lauren's resistance. Her dismissiveness, her refusal to engage, a complete record of her attitude throughout the entire training. Somewhere else, Jonathan sat in his office, his fingers interlocked beneath his chin. Before him lay Lauren's personnel file. He flipped through the pages slowly, absorbing every detail. The more he read, the more he realized. This wasn't just about one unprofessional flight attendant. He murmured, leaning back in his chair. Closing the file, Jonathan gazed out the window, his expression distant. This wasn't just about disciplining an employee. It was about breaking a cycle that had existed for far too long. Reaching for his phone, he dialed Janet, the head of human resources. "I've been thinking about the pilot program we discussed, the initiative to address unconscious bias in the workplace." "Yes, Mr. Carter," Janet's voice came through the line. "We're still in the planning phase. I want to accelerate the timeline," Jonathan said, his voice calm but firm. "And I already have our first participant in mind." He explained everything he had uncovered about Lauren, as well as his belief that she should be enrolled in the training program. Janet listened carefully, occasionally asking questions. "Are you sure about this, sir?" she asked after a pause. Given her recent behavior, some might say this approach is too lenient. Jonathan smiled slightly, though Janet couldn't see it over the phone. Sometimes the people who need help the most are the ones who don't even realize they need it. After ending the call, Jonathan leaned back in his chair, feeling a mix of hope and determination. He knew this wouldn't be easy. Lauren's biases had been ingrained over years, shaped by an environment that had only reinforced them. But Jonathan also understood the power of education, of being exposed to perspectives different from one's own. It showed a younger Jonathan, standing proudly in front of his first company. "God knows I've been given second chances too." Setting the photo down, he began sketching out ideas for the program. It had to be comprehensive, not just focused on workplace behavior, but tackling the root causes of bias. He envisioned workshops, one-on-one mentorships, and even community outreach programs. The more he worked, the clearer his mission became. This wasn't just about changing one person. It wasn't just about changing an airline. It was about creating a ripple effect, one that could impact countless lives. The next morning, Lauren walked into the employee lounge, head held high, though a gnawing sense of unease lurked beneath her confidence. She made her way to the coffee machine but quickly noticed a group of colleagues gathered nearby, whispering among themselves. The moment they saw her, they dispersed, avoiding her gaze. "Good morning." Lauren forced a cheerful tone. No one responded. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured her coffee. This had been happening more and more frequently. People were acting strange around her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As she stirred her coffee, David, her supervisor, walked in. "Lauren, can you step into my office for a moment?" Her heartbeat quickened. "Of course," she replied, forcing a smile. Inside David's office, the air felt thick, heavy. He cleared his throat, looking slightly tense. "Lauren, I've received some complaints regarding your attitude on recent flights. Her face flushed. Complaints? What do you mean? David shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. Taking a deep breath, he kept his voice steady. There have been reports about, well, let's just say, less than professional behavior towards certain passengers. Lauren stiffened, her instinct to defend herself kicking in. I uphold the highest standards in first class. If passengers can't meet those standards, that's not my fault. David's expression darkened, his tone firming. Lauren, this isn't about standards. It's about how you treat people. Leaving David's office, Lauren felt the walls closing in around her. She couldn't believe this was happening. Her entire career, she had prided herself on maintaining order, structure, and the elite standards of first class. And now everything was turning against her. Over the next few days, things only got worse. Colleagues she had worked with for years suddenly had schedule conflicts. She was reassigned to unfamiliar flight crews, teams who watched her with quiet wariness. One afternoon, while checking the passenger list for an upcoming flight, Lauren overheard two flight attendants whispering in the corner. Did you hear about Lauren? One murmured. Of course. Word is there's an investigation. Something about discrimination. Lauren froze. Her heart pounded. Investigation, discrimination. The words echoed in her mind, leaving her dizzy, breathless. Boarding the next flight, Lauren felt an overwhelming sense of unease creeping over her. For the first time in years, she began to question herself. Had she really been wrong? Had her actions truly been discriminatory? Throughout the flight, doubt plagued her every move. When a passenger asked for help with their luggage, she hesitated, afraid that her response might be scrutinized. When she served drinks, she worried. Was she unconsciously favoring one passenger over another? By the end of the flight, Lauren was completely drained. The stress, self-doubt, and anxiety had taken their toll. As she gathered her belongings to leave, her eyes caught her own reflection in the airplane window. The confident, self-assured woman she once knew seemed to have vanished. In her place was someone uncertain and afraid. Elsewhere, Jonathan sat in his office, eyes fixed on his computer screen. For weeks, he had been silently tracking Lauren's progress in the training program. He carefully reviewed every report, every piece of feedback. Rachel, his assistant, walked in and placed a hot cup of coffee on his desk. "How's she doing?" she asked. Jonathan let out a long sigh, rubbing his temples. It's hard to say. He scrolled through a series of recorded training sessions, watching them play across the screen. One clip showed Lauren listening intently, asking thoughtful questions about cultural awareness. Another showed her sitting stiffly, her eyes filled with resistance. Jonathan murmured to himself, "She's fighting a battle within. She wants to change, but old habits, they don't break easily." Rachel nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "So what's your next move?" Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his gaze resolute. It's time to push her harder. She needs to confront her past actions head-on. He opened a document on his screen, tapping his finger against it. Public acknowledgement. His voice was steady, unwavering. It's a bold move, but I believe it's necessary. This next step was more ambitious than anything they had done before. Lauren would have to stand before her colleagues, and even some of the passengers she had wronged, to admit her past mistakes and share the lessons she had learned. Rachel frowned, her voice laced with concern. "Are you sure about this, Jonathan? This could backfire." Jonathan nodded slowly. "I know, but Lauren needs this push. She's been hiding behind her defenses for too long. It's time she faces the truth about her actions." He stood and walked toward the window, gazing down at the bustling airport below. This is her chance to prove real growth, to show that she can change. And if she does, it won't just help her. It could inspire others in this company to reflect on themselves, too. Rachel stayed silent, watching him, admiring his unwavering commitment to this mission. And if she can't? Jonathan turned back, his expression serious. "Then at least we'll know we did everything we could." But then, a faint smile touched his lips. "I have hope for Lauren." I've seen glimpses of who she could be. Returning to his desk, he picked up the phone. It's time to move forward. Schedule a meeting with the training team. We need to prepare Lauren for what's coming. As Jonathan dialed the number, he felt the weight of his decision settle on his shoulders. He knew the upcoming challenge would push Lauren to her limits. But he also knew it was necessary not just for her but for the entire airline. Lauren's hands trembled as she read the email on her phone. Her heart pounded, a cold sweat forming on her brow. The next training session, it wasn't just another routine meeting. It was going to be broadcast live to every employee in the company. Her lips parted, but only a single whisper escaped. No way, her voice was so soft it nearly disappeared in the empty break room. Frantically, she scrolled back up, hoping she had misread. But she hadn't. The words stared back at her in bold, undeniable print. Your next training session will be streamed live as part of the company's transparency and inclusive growth initiative. Lauren's head spun. Everyone would be watching. Her colleagues, her superiors, the new owners of the airline. But worst of all, she would have to talk about that day. The day she had confronted a passenger who turned out to be Jonathan Carter. The days passed, and Lauren's anxiety grew heavier with each one. At night, she lay awake, haunted by memories of that day. Her own words echoed in her head. The look in Jonathan's eyes as she humiliated him. And now, looking back, she felt sick. Curling into herself beneath the blankets, she winced at the shame rising in her chest. What was I thinking? She whispered, tossing and turning. How could I have been so blind? The night before the live broadcast, Lauren sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by crumpled notes and half-finished outlines. She had tried desperately to prepare, to find the right words to explain herself. But everything she wrote felt empty, meaningless. I can't do this. She shoved her chair back, frustrated. I can't stand in front of everyone and admit I was wrong. But no matter how much she wanted to run, she knew she couldn't. This was her only chance to prove she had learned from her mistakes. Her only chance to show people that she could change. With trembling hands, she picked up her pen again. But this time, instead of justifying herself, she focused on the truth. She wrote about her biases, her flawed mindset, the harm she had caused, whether she had meant to or not. When the morning sun rose on the day of the live broadcast, fear and determination clashed inside her. She dressed carefully, smoothing every crease of her uniform, as if she could erase the wrinkles of her past mistakes. At the training center, her stomach twisted at the sight of the tech crew setting up cameras and microphones. The weight of reality crashed down on her. MS. Lauren, we're ready. A young technician approached. Just look at the main camera and try to forget that it's live. You'll do fine. Lauren nodded, unable to trust her own voice. As she stepped forward, the world around her felt like it had slowed to a crawl. The lights were too bright. The silence was too heavy. She took a deep, shaky breath and faced the camera. At that moment, Lauren knew everything was about to change. Her reputation, her career, even the way she saw herself. It all came down to what she was about to say. Lauren stood before the camera, hands clenched tightly to keep them from trembling. The red recording light blinked. She was live. The entire company was watching. She took a deep breath and began. Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren Mitchell, and today, I want to talk about something that happened on one of our flights. Her voice wavered slightly, but she pushed through. I made a serious mistake. I treated a passenger unfairly, simply because of his skin color. As she recounted the incident involving Jonathan Carter, her throat tightened. I was wrong, completely wrong. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I hurt someone who never deserved it. Tears welled in her eyes as she continued. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on why I acted the way I did. It hasn't been easy to admit, but I grew up in an environment where these attitudes were normal. But that is not an excuse. I should have known better. Just as Lauren was beginning to show true remorse, a sudden commotion erupted from behind the cameras. Beyond the recording area, the director of communications rushed in, leaning in to whisper something to the producer. Lauren faltered, her words catching in her throat. Is something wrong? The producer gestured for her to continue, but Lauren could see the tension on everyone's faces. She struggled to finish her speech, but her mind was now racing with questions. As soon as the cameras cut off, the room descended into chaos. She caught fragments of hushed conversations. Breaking news, airline under fire, PR stunt backlash. Her stomach dropped. A major media outlet had just published a scathing article criticizing the airline's new policies, including the very training program she had just participated in. The article, which was now spreading like wildfire, accused the airline of performative activism, a hollow publicity stunt meant to placate the public. It questioned the authenticity of the training sessions and implied that there was no real systemic change happening behind the scenes. A wave of disillusionment crashed over Lauren. She had begun to believe in the possibility of change, for herself and for the company. But now did anything she just said even matter? In his office, Jonathan Carter's phone rang nonstop. Board members, shareholders, executives. The media backlash threatened to undo everything they had worked for. He knew he had to act fast. They needed to prove that these reforms weren't just a publicity stunt, that real, lasting change was happening. Hanging up after another tense call, Jonathan exhaled deeply, rubbing his temples. He had always believed in the power of transformation, both at a personal and organizational level. Now, he had to show the world that their efforts were genuine. The criticism stung, but he wouldn't let it derail their mission. Picking up his phone, Jonathan prepared to strike back, to prove that real change was not just possible, but already happening. The next morning, Jonathan Carter sat at the head of the table in the airline's largest conference room, his expression calm yet unyielding. He had called for a company-wide meeting to directly respond to the criticism. The room was packed. Flight attendants, pilots, customer service representatives, and senior executives all sat together, awaiting his words. In the back row, Lauren shifted uneasily in her seat, her eyes darting around, filled with nervous anticipation. Then Jonathan stood, his voice steady as it carried through the room. Thank you all for being here today. Today, we're not going to talk about policies or public relations. We're going to listen, because before we can truly change, we need to hear the voices of those who have been affected. Today, we will listen to our passengers. A hush fell over the room as passengers began stepping forward to speak. Their voices, filled with raw emotion, painted an undeniable picture of the discrimination they had faced while flying. A young Muslim woman recounted how she was asked to switch seats because another passenger refused to sit next to her. A Latino businessman described the repeated questioning he endured every time he presented his first-class ticket. One by one, their stories unfolded. The room remained silent. Every so often, a quiet sniffle or a sharp inhale broke the stillness. Lauren sat frozen, her face growing paler with each testimony. She saw herself in their stories, and that realization twisted in her gut like a knife. Then an elderly, black woman stepped forward, her frail hands trembling as she adjusted her glasses. She took a deep breath before speaking, her voice thick with emotion. I remember a time when I asked for help storing my bag, but the flight attendant looked right through me, like I wasn't even there. And yet, just minutes later, a white passenger asked for help, and she smiled and assisted him right away. Lauren froze. She knew this story. This was the very incident Jonathan had witnessed on that fateful flight. Her throat tightened. The elderly woman's voice trembled as she continued. To some, this might seem small, insignificant even, but to me it hurt. It made me feel like I wasn't a person, like I didn't matter. Lauren's vision blurred with tears. She had always thought her actions were minor, trivial, things not worth dwelling on. But now, she saw the truth. The smallest moments could carve deep wounds in someone else's heart. A weight of realization crashed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The conversation continued, with passenger after passenger sharing their experiences. Each story cut deeper than the last, painting an undeniable picture of bias and discrimination in the airline industry. Around the room, Employees exchanged glances, some ashamed, some stunned awake for the first time. For many of them, this was the first time they were truly understanding the impact of their actions, or worse, their inaction. Jonathan watched in silence, taking in every reaction. He saw shock. He saw remorse. And in some eyes, he saw the first flicker of awareness. But his gaze remained fixed on Lauren. Tears streamed down her face. She shrunk into herself, as if wishing she could disappear. When the final passenger stepped down from the podium, Jonathan stood up. His voice was heavy with emotion. Thank you all for your courage in sharing your stories. This is why we are here. This is why we must change. Not for reputation, not for profit, but because it is the right thing to do. Silence hung in the air, thick and contemplative. It was as if everyone in the room was still processing the weight of what they had just heard. Then, a small but resolute voice cut through the quiet. I have something to say. Lauren spoke, her voice shaky, but firm. Every head in the room turned toward her. She rose to her feet, slowly stepping forward. Jonathan nodded, encouragingly. At the podium, Lauren gripped the edges tightly, her fingers digging into the wood to steady her trembling hands. She took a deep breath. Then, she whispered, My name is Lauren, and I stand here today to admit that I have been part of the problem. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Lauren swallowed hard, but she didn't stop. I grew up in a small town where everyone looked like me. We didn't talk about diversity or inclusion. We just lived in our own little world. She paused, taking a deep breath, summoning courage. When I became a flight attendant, I carried those biases with me. I didn't even realize I had them, but listening to the stories today, I finally see it. I see how my actions have hurt people. Tears welled up in her eyes again. Her voice dropped, quiet but filled with emotion. I treated passengers differently based on how they looked. I ignored some while giving preference to others. And I am ashamed. The room was silent. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, hanging on to every word. But Lauren wasn't finished. Her voice grew stronger. But feeling ashamed isn't enough. I need to change. We all need to change. It's hard to challenge the beliefs we've carried our entire lives. But it's necessary. She looked out at the audience, meeting the eyes of the passengers who had shared their painful experiences. I'm sorry. Her voice cracked. I am truly sorry for the harm I've caused. And starting today, I promise to do better. To be better. When Lauren finished, the room remained still for a moment. Then soft applause began, growing slowly. Some nodded, recognizing her sincerity. Others remained skeptical, arms crossed, brows furrowed. Jonathan stood at the edge of the room, taking it all in. A faint smile crossed his lips. He knew Lauren's journey wasn't over. But this was an important first step. As the forum concluded, Jonathan approached Lauren. His expression wasn't harsh, but it wasn't entirely gentle either. Lauren, can we talk privately for a moment? His voice was calm, but enough to make her heartbeat quicken. Yes, of course. She nodded, following Jonathan to a quiet corner, away from the dispersing crowd. He inhaled deeply. There's something I need to tell you. Jonathan's voice was steady. Do you remember the passenger you had a conflict with on flight 1023 last month? Lauren's face drained of color. Of course, she remembered. That moment had set everything in motion. She swallowed hard. Yes. Her voice was barely a whisper, dissolving into the air between them. Jonathan held her gaze. That passenger was me. The words hit Lauren like a thunderclap. She staggered back, her eyes widening in horror. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. She whispered. God. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Jonathan raised a hand, signaling her to stop. His voice was calm but firm. That day I was furious, Lauren. Very furious. What you did was completely unacceptable. Tears welled in Lauren's eyes as the weight of her actions crushed her. She had slapped a passenger. Not just any passenger, the man who now owned the entire airline. But Jonathan continued, his tone softening slightly. But I saw an opportunity to turn that moment into something bigger, a catalyst for real change in this company. Lauren looked at him, her eyes red with shame and confusion. You mean you didn't fire me on the spot? Jonathan shook his head. No. Because firing you wouldn't have solved the deeper issues. Instead, I wanted to address the root cause of discrimination in this airline. Lauren stood frozen. She had expected punishment, a swift, unforgiving judgment. But not this, not understanding. She clumsily wiped her tears away. I don't know what to say. Jonathan's gaze was no longer just firm. It carried expectation. You don't have to say anything. His voice was gentle. Just keep learning. Keep growing. That's enough. Lauren nodded slowly, a storm of emotions swirling inside her. She still felt deep shame for her past actions. But beyond that, she felt an overwhelming gratitude. She had been given something she never expected. A chance to make things right. Thank you. Her voice was small, but genuine. For giving me the chance to learn and change. I promise, I won't let you down. Jonathan smiled, his expression warm yet full of expectation. I believe in you, Lauren. Now let's work together to make this airline a place where everyone feels welcomed and respected. Jonathan took a deep breath, his gaze steady on Lauren. I have a proposal for you. His voice was calm but firm. Lauren looked up, her eyes wide with confusion. Proposal? She repeated, unsure of where this was going. Jonathan nodded. I want to offer you a leadership role in our new cultural and inclusion initiative. Lauren's mouth fell open, but no words came out. Of all the possibilities she had considered, she never saw this coming. Me? But why? She stammered. Jonathan held her gaze, his expression unwavering. Because you've lived it. You've seen firsthand how deeply ingrained biases can shape behavior. And now you're learning how to break free from them. Lauren sat in silent reflection, her heartbeat pounding in her chest. Jonathan's tone grew more serious. Let me be clear. This is not a reward. This is an opportunity. An opportunity to make things right by helping others learn from your mistakes. Lauren inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of his words. This wasn't just a job. It was a responsibility. Jonathan continued. You'll work directly with our training team. You'll share your story, lead discussions, and help develop new programs to combat discrimination in our company. As Jonathan spoke, something shifted inside Lauren. The shame she had carried for so long was slowly transforming into something else. A determination to do better, to be better. I don't know what to say. Her voice trembled. I'm honored that you trust me, after everything I've done. Jonathan smiled slightly. It's not about trust, Lauren. It's about growth. You've proven that you can change. Now, I want you to help others do the same. Lauren took a deep breath, feeling the full weight of the responsibility settling on her shoulders. But instead of fear, for the first time in a long time, she felt a true sense of purpose. I accept. Her voice was stronger now. I want to make this right. Jonathan nodded, his eyes filled with approval. Good. But remember, this journey isn't just about changing others. It's about continuing to change yourself. Lauren understood. She knew this journey wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt, difficult days. But for the first time in a long time, she felt true hope. I'm ready. Her voice carried a newfound determination. I promise to approach this with humility and compassion. I know I still have so much to learn, but I am committed to being better, for myself, for the passengers I have wronged, and for the future of this company. Jonathan smiled as he looked into Lauren's sincere eyes. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he believed in the power of second chances. And in this moment, seeing Lauren's transformation, he was even more convinced. Real change was possible. Lauren stepped into the meeting room, her heart pounding. Today was her first day in her new role. Excitement and anxiety warred within her. At the front of the room, Jonathan stood beside a team of trainers from diverse backgrounds. Everyone, I'd like to introduce Lauren, he said, turning toward her. She'll be working with us to develop our new cultural awareness workshops. Silence filled the room. Lauren felt the weight of their gazes. She knew many of them had heard about her past. She could sense the skepticism in their eyes. Taking a deep breath, she spoke. I know some of you are wondering why I'm here. Her voice wavered slightly, but she stayed firm. I made mistakes in the past, but I'm here because I want to make things right. I want to help others learn from my failures. In the days that followed, Lauren threw herself into the work. She spent hours researching, brainstorming, ideas with the trainers, and sharing her personal experiences. It wasn't always easy. She still heard whispers behind her back. Some people still watched her with doubt. One afternoon, during a team meeting, a trainer named Daniel spoke up. How do we know you've really changed? His voice was sharp, direct. He locked eyes with Lauren, his expression serious. How do we know this isn't just a performance? The room fell silent. Heat rose to Lauren's cheeks, but she didn't look away. She held Daniel's gaze, unwavering. That's a fair question, she said. I can't prove my sincerity with words alone, but I hope that through my actions, through my dedication to this program, you'll see that I'm truly committed to change. Jonathan observed the exchange, a quiet nod of approval at Lauren's response. As the weeks turned into months, Lauren's hard work began to show results. The workshops she helped design received positive feedback from employees. Her personal story, shared openly in training sessions, resonated with many who were struggling with their own biases. The skepticism that once surrounded her began to fade. Colleagues who had once avoided her now sought her out for advice. Even Daniel, her harshest critic, gradually changed his attitude. One afternoon, after a particularly successful workshop, Jonathan pulled Lauren aside. You're doing great. A warm smile crossed his face. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. A wave of emotion surged through Lauren. She met Jonathan's gaze, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you. Her voice was soft but sincere. This opportunity has changed my life. I just hope I'm truly making a difference. Jonathan nodded. You are. People are beginning to see that change is possible. And that's a powerful message. That evening, as Lauren left the office, she felt something she had never truly felt before. A sense of purpose. A feeling that, at last, she was on the right path. The journey wasn't over. There was still so much work to be done. But for the first time, Lauren felt hopeful about the future. As weeks turned into months, the airline's cultural transformation became undeniable. Both passengers and employees noticed significant improvements in service, in inclusivity, and in the overall flying experience. One sunny afternoon, Jonathan sat in his office, carefully reviewing the latest feedback reports. A slow smile spread across his face as he read each comment, praising the airline's renewed commitment to diversity and respect. Suddenly, Jonathan's assistant stepped into the office, holding a tablet. Mr. Carter, you'll want to see this. She placed the device on his desk. On the screen, a headline from a major news outlet flashed across the display. This airline's cultural transformation is setting a new industry standard. Jonathan scrolled through the article, a swell of pride rising in his chest. The piece detailed the positive changes the airline had implemented, from enhanced employee training to more inclusive policies. It emphasized how these reforms had significantly improved customer satisfaction and employee morale. Meanwhile, in a training room, across the city, Lauren stood before a group of new flight attendants, leading a workshop. She shared her personal journey, and as she spoke, she noticed the intent eyes of those listening. I used to think I was just doing my job. Her voice lowered, carrying deep emotion. But now I understand my actions hurt people. It's not easy to confront our own biases, but doing so has made me a better person and a better employee. As the session ended, a young trainee approached, her face lit with admiration. Your story is truly inspiring, she said. It makes me believe that real change is possible. A warmth spread through Lauren's chest. She was making a difference, just as she had hoped. That weekend, Jonathan called for a company-wide meeting to review their cultural reform progress. Standing before the entire workforce, He couldn't hide the pride in his voice. The changes we've made aren't just benefiting our passengers. His words echoed across the room. They're benefiting all of us. We're creating a workplace where everyone feels valued and respected. He paused, scanning the crowd, until his eyes landed on Lauren. And I'd like to take a moment to recognize someone who has become a symbol of our transformation. Lauren, would you stand up? For a split second, the room fell silent. Then all eyes turned to Lauren. She rose slowly, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. But Jonathan continued. Lauren's journey, from acknowledging her mistakes to becoming a leader in our cultural awareness initiative, is proof that change is possible. When we have the courage to confront our own biases and learn from them, we can become better people. The room erupted into applause. Genuine, resounding applause. Lauren glanced around, taking in the faces of her colleagues. For the first time, she saw respect and admiration, where once there had been skepticism and doubt. She pressed her lips together, overwhelmed with emotion. For the first time in her life, she felt like she truly belonged. Where there had once been hesitation and scrutiny, now there was recognition and acceptance. As the meeting ended, Jonathan approached Lauren, his expression full of encouragement. You should be proud of yourself. His voice was warm, sincere. Your story is inspiring others to reflect on their own biases and strive for change. Lauren nodded, a mix of humility and quiet pride in her chest. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, she replied. I never thought I could make this kind of difference. One morning, Lauren stood at the front of a training room, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and excitement. Before her sat a new group of employees, a diverse collection of individuals from various backgrounds and cultures. She took a deep breath before beginning a lesson on empathy and respect. Good morning, everyone. Her voice was warm, inviting. Today, I want to share something important with you. And it's not just about company policies or customer service skills. It's about how we impact others in ways we don't always realize. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. I want to tell you a story. My story. It's not an easy story to share, but I believe you need to hear it. Lauren recounted the incident with Jonathan, her voice carrying raw emotion as she described her biased actions and the consequences they left behind. The room was silent. Every pair of eyes was locked on her. I used to think I was just doing my job. Her voice caught slightly, but the truth is, I let my biases control my actions. I didn't realize the harm I had caused until it was too late. As Lauren continued speaking, she noticed a shift in the expressions of the trainees. Some looked shocked. Some nodded, as if they had witnessed similar situations before. A few even had tears in their eyes. The hardest part wasn't facing the consequences, she admitted, her voice lowering. It was facing myself, admitting that I needed to change. But that moment became the start of my journey toward becoming a better person, a better employee. She shared how the training programs had helped her expand her perspective, allowing her to understand the experiences of others. Lauren recounted the stories of passengers, those who had faced discrimination on the very flights they had paid to be on. She wanted the trainees to understand that the smallest actions could have the greatest impact. Every interaction we have with a passenger is an opportunity. Lauren's voice grew stronger. An opportunity to make someone feel valued, respected, and welcomed. But if we aren't careful, it can also be an opportunity to cause harm. If we fail to recognize our own biases. As the session continued, Lauren encouraged the trainees to share their thoughts and experiences. The room came alive. People began to open up about their own fears and biases, the ones they had carried unknowingly. A young trainee hesitated before raising her hand, her eyes filled with reflection. I never realized that small actions could have such a huge impact. Her voice trembled slightly. Your story makes me want to reflect on myself. Lauren smiled, a warm feeling spreading through her chest. This was why she did this work, to help others understand and grow, just as she had. As the session came to an end, Lauren felt a new surge of energy within her. She saw in the trainees' eyes the same determination to change, the same feeling she had once experienced when her own journey began. "Remember this," she said as they gathered their things. "Empathy and respect aren't just words. They're choices we make every day. And those choices can change someone's life completely." At the back of the room, Jonathan quietly observed Lauren, a mix of pride and awe swelling in his chest. The woman leading this training with passion and understanding was no longer the same prejudiced flight attendant he had confronted months ago. As Lauren guided the trainees through an exercise on recognizing unconscious bias, Jonathan's mind drifted back to the journey they had taken together. He remembered that slap, the rage that had surged through him that day. But instead of seeking revenge, he had chosen a different path, the path of compassion and transformation. The airline itself had undergone an incredible transformation. From a company drowning in discrimination complaints to a model of inclusion in the industry, the reforms Jonathan had initiated had taken root, cultivating a culture of respect and understanding, spreading through every level of the organization. Lauren's voice pulled Jonathan back to the present. Every interaction is an opportunity to make someone feel valued and respected. Our words and actions have power. Let's use them to do good. The trainees nodded, determination shining in their eyes. The same determination Jonathan had once seen in Lauren when she first committed to change. A powerful reminder of how far they had all come. As the session ended, Jonathan stepped toward Lauren. "That was incredible." His voice was warm, filled with admiration. "You've truly found your path." Lauren's eyes glistened, tears of gratitude and emotion forming at the corners. "I never thought I would be here," she admitted softly. "Thank you for giving me the chance to make things right." Jonathan smiled, a deep sense of fulfillment settling over him. Only now did he truly understand the power of a compassionate kind of justice. Not punishing those who wronged us, but helping them become the best version of themselves. In doing so, they hadn't just changed Lauren. They hadn't just changed the airline. They had sparked a ripple effect, a wave of positive change that would continue to spread. "We've all learned so much," Jonathan said, resting a hand lightly on Lauren's shoulder. "And look at what we've built together." Both of them turned to take in the room, a place no longer filled with doubt and division, but with hope, growth, and a future they had shaped together. We're new trainees, full of energy and purpose, prepared to carry the message of inclusion and respect into every corner of the airline. A deep sense of hope filled Jonathan's heart. They had turned a moment of injustice into a catalyst for transformation. Compassion, when paired with justice, could lead to the most complete form of redemption. This story reminds us that change is always possible, as long as we are willing to confront our own mistakes. But if you were in Jonathan's position, would you have chosen the path of forgiveness and transformation? Or would you have pursued strict punishment without room for redemption? Have you ever faced a situation where compassion and justice seem to be in conflict? How did you choose? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story could inspire someone else. If you found this story meaningful, don't hesitate to share it with your friends and family. Together, let's spread the message of empathy, respect, and second chances. Thank you for following this journey. Every story is a lesson, and every lesson has the power to change a life. Like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with more inspiring stories. These stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any specific individual or organization. They are shared to promote human values and social awareness and have been rewritten with the assistance of AI. If there are any inaccuracies, we appreciate your understanding and kindness. Wishing you all the best in life.